I got to tell you this. I remember when I was 18, 19, and I was working in the civil service in King's Lynn, and big drinking culture. Thursday, Friday after work, lunchtimes as well. There was a big crew of us. And there was a woman there who didn't drink, and she was really good fun. And she would come occasionally if it was like, the Christmas party or something. I was definitely one of them. There was 2 or 3 of us who went on and on and on at her for not drinking. I look back and I realized she was sober. I remember a couple of times she said, "Oh, I used to drink when I was younger." Like, it really piqued me. I got a little bee, and I look back with shame now.
Yeah.
She was sober and we were doing that to her. So I know I've also done it.
I dreamt that you were twisting through 7.
Hello, everybody. You are listening to the Soberful podcast, and I'm Veronica.
And I'm Chip.
Welcome. If you have a minute, could you just have a quick look on, if you listen to this on the Apple platform or Spotify, and just give us a quick rating or a quick review? It does help with getting the podcast noticed, and we'd really appreciate if you could just give a quick tap on your phone and give it a quick rating. With that over, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about sabotage and how people can often try and sabotage somebody's sobriety for a variety of reasons. But I think it's something that is quite common, and I'm amazed we haven't done a podcast on it before, actually. But
I am. So that's happened several times where I'm like, this has been 6 years and I can't believe we haven't talked about this.
I know.
I think we have in sort of various threads and stuff, but I don't think we've done like a whole episode around it.
No, but I think it's much more common than we, within families, within relationships, within friendship groups. Because when you're making a decision to be sober, you are actually making quite a radical change. You're making a radical change to your normal behavior, your drinking behavior, but also your social behavior, the things you're prepared to do socially, maybe the things you're prepared to do intimately within a relationship might have changed completely as a result of being sober. Maybe within your family, there was a kind of history of, well, this is what we do at Christmas. We all get a little bit, and everybody gets a bit drunk and they all fall down on the sofas after us. But there are all sorts of ways, I think, when people make a final decision, what they hope will be the final decision to get sober, when significant people around them try to undermine that decision. And they can do it quite overtly, and they can do it quite subtly. The example I always use to illustrate this is when I first started working in rehab, we used to have the family come up on a weekend, and this mother came to see her daughter, young daughter, 23 years old, making a really good decision to be sober at a young age. Definitely had a problem, did really well in rehab, was really flying and really did well. Mother came up, they spent the day together, and at the end we'd always have a session with the mother, whoever it was. And I said to the mother, "Well, how do you find her now?" And she said, "She's boring. I've lost my fun friend." And the daughter was absolutely mortified. And this was a mother whose daughter had it wasn't as if this daughter had just had a little bit of a drink. This daughter had a drink problem.
Yeah, I mean, to get into rehab at 23, there would have been some very visible consequences, wasn't
exactly
there? Very visible consequences.
And all the mother was concerned about was the fact that she had lost her drinking companion. And I was absolutely aghast. I just started working. It was a long time ago. And I thought, I can't believe I've just witnessed this. And I remember going into the staff room and telling people, and they went, "Oh, that happens all the time." And subsequently in my career, I have seen it happen an awful lot, where a wife or a husband will say, "All right, I'm going to stop drinking." And there's been a history of that relationship where they get through a bottle of wine or a bottle and a half every night when people come home from work. And suddenly one person says, "Well, I'm going to stop doing that." And that really brings the other person up with a choice then. What do I do? Do I support this decision? Do I go? And just the fact that they've got to start thinking about it and not just go, "Yeah, that's a really good idea," can often lead to a lot of arguments. You've become boring. You're not interesting any longer. You're not fun any longer. You're not sexy any longer.
What do we do? Like, what do we do?
Yeah.
Like, what do we do?
Yeah.
Like that. What about the wine pairing and the this and that we used to do? And
so what are we going to do when we go out to a restaurant? What are they going to do?
Yeah.
Well, you've ruined everything now. And just anybody who gets sober knows that when they tell people that they're sober, they will be met with 100 people saying, "Oh, yes, I understand. I haven't got a problem. I've got my problems all right." Just a lot of blur that comes when you tell somebody you haven't drank. We've done plenty of episodes on that. But I think it's when people go about actually trying to undermine your recovery and sobriety. And I mean, I've seen it as overtly as spiking somebody's drink. Somebody's sober and they
Wow.
get up and somebody puts a couple of shots in somebody's glass. And that's a terrible thing to do, but I've certainly heard that happen. And I think it's because people around somebody who's made a decision to get sober get frightened that they're going to have to change as well. And yeah, they probably are going to have to. They're going to have to make some. They are going to have to change. If you're in a relationship with somebody who's a heavy drinker and they decide to stop drinking and you've been drinking along with them, you're going to have to make a decision to either support that decision, go off drinking on your own, or one choice that you could have is, I'll undermine this process so we get back to how it was before.
I think it's very common. Well, you hit the nail on the head there. And so this happens a lot in couples as well, I think. I have a lot of clients who come to me who their partner is the big part of their relationship is they drink together. And this is a client group that's pretty successful. They're pretty, they've done well. They eat in nice restaurants. They buy nice wine. And the client comes to me and it's been years that they've been thinking about not drinking and wanting to stop, but they have been really scared about how it's going to affect their relationship. It's such a central part of what they do that is the reason that's kept them drinking for longer often. And I don't want to say it's not the other person's fault, is we find, excuses to, and then they finally stop and the other person doesn't want to accept that the change, it upsets the apple cart. And they don't want that change. And so what we're dealing with here, whether it's family or friends or whatever, is when we stop drinking, what we're doing is saying it's a problem. It doesn't agree with me. My life would be better without it. Now, if we drink together and we drink the same, what does that say about your drinking? So the first thing is people take it very, very personally, and they're just they don't want to look at it. They don't want to see. This is not, you are reflecting something back to them that they do not want to see, which I think is what you're talking about with that mother there, isn't it? It's like, she doesn't want to see that not drinking is an option because she has a very ingrained belief that drinking equals fun. So the sabotage can be subtle, it can be covert, or it can be really in your face as well. I think, one of the things that's awful, the pulling people down, they're just like, are you still being boring? Are you still being boring? Are you going to be boring this weekend? Like that really pisses me off. Right.
And that you do hear an awful lot. And I think this is a bit of a sweeping generalization, but I think most heavy drinkers who are in relationships, the chances are that the partner drinks quite heavily as well. You often get, as you've just described, couples who drink the same way. And that was probably maybe one of the things that attracted them to each other in the first place. The fact that, they drink like I do, that's great. So, and because when we do drink, we do tend to surround ourselves with people who drink like us. We don't want to be, that's a given, really, that we will, because how many times have we heard, well, all my friends drink like that? Because we do surround ourselves with people who drink like us. So when we make the decision to get sober, we are breaking away from the crowd. And some people will try, they might dress it up as being, well, I was frightened of losing you. So I didn't want you to get sober because I was frightened of losing you, which would sound wonderfully kind of affectionate, but actually is incredibly destructive. I think I see it in families as well, where there has been a family history of everybody going out to restaurants or something, and
family gatherings,
where we've
the drinking culture in families is really fascinating, isn't it? And like when they were kids, the parents always drank and whatever, and now the kids are adults. It's like they're part of that family drinking culture. Is fascinating to me.
Yes, and when somebody in a family gets sober, the family are very aware of it, and they will react in several different ways. Sometimes they'll say, okay, well, we'll all stop drinking when you're here then, and make the person feel very uncomfortable. Or they'll not quite know how to talk about it. They'll not quite know how to address it. But some families will get passively aggressive about it. And as you say, undermine it. Well, this isn't what we do. We don't know. Why are you? No, we always do this. We've done this for years. We've always toasted this at that. And you're made to feel as if you're kind of doing something really negative and really destructive to either the relationship or the family. But it can happen in friendship groups as well, where somebody makes a decision. I mean, I had a long-term friendship with somebody I was at school with, and I made a decision to get sober. I realized that the role I played in that relationship was that I was the one that he could always turn to and go, well, I'm not as bad as Chip. And suddenly I got sober and I wasn't messing about and falling over any longer. And he didn't like it because it shone the spotlight on his drinking and using. And he didn't like that at all. And there was, oh, for God's sake, come on, you've always done you're the worst of the lot, and kind of trying to sort of get me to buy into my reputation for being the worst person, which, sometimes people do grieve that personality that they were when they were the drunken person. But I can remember him really kind of going, gosh, it's a bit boring, isn't it? What, it's a bit straight,
Well, that's the number one thing that is weaponized, is you're boring and you're not fun anymore.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing, that how people will try and sabotage your sobriety. Yeah. And it hurts, right? Who wants to be told that? It really, really hurts. And the thing is, at the beginning, there is quite a lot of, well, I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to do that thing. I'm not going to, because you're just trying to get your sea legs in sobriety. And we've emphasized on this show over and over and over, down the road, both you and I have had absolutely full social lives doing everything different when we've been different ages and whatever. That it's just an early sobriety thing. But however, I think that's the one that really gets under people's skin, because nobody wants to be called that. And you probably feel that you are a bit, if it's early days, that you are a lot of staying home and saying no. And then how do you come back from that? It's like, what do you say to it? Like, it's really hard to argue against. And so my advice would be to not argue against it. It's such a, drunk people are the most boring people on the planet.
Yeah.
They are so boring and repetitive. And it's the same. And going back to the family drinking, or just the people that we drink with, where it's very established, it's always the same old.
Yeah.
It's the same drinks and the same way and the same conversations and the same stupidity. It's so boring. But I think that can really, and I'm going to tell you, that's where you need sober friends. It's really hard to withstand that on your own when you've got 2 or 3 people who have relationships with aiming those darts at you.
Yep. I mean, I've had clients who have, not that long ago actually, who went out with an old drinking friend and realized that, the drinking had been such an integral part of their relationship that it kind of completely changed the dynamic. And some people are able to kind of roll with that and go, okay, I'm happy for you. Some people kind of go, well, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hang out with you any longer because things are different. I think it happens in relationships where people, again, it's very difficult to talk about this sometimes without making generalizations, but I think especially in a long-term marriage where the sexual intimacy might have been alcohol fueled, where it's allowed one person to be, to tolerate sexual behavior or sex they didn't really want to do, and then suddenly they get sober and the other person is going, really, you're not sexy any longer, we used to have such great sex and now we don't, and and it's like your fault because you're sober that we're not having this great sex any longer. And nobody wants to be told that. It's really undermining. And I think, as I said, I know we're probably going to repeat this phrase a lot during this episode, but I think it's always comes from fear of the other person being exposed, fear of change, because I'm doing this, it does require some sort of change. You can't be in a relationship with somebody who suddenly gets sober without it significantly changing your behavior. And you're either prepared to embrace that because you're happy for the other person to get sober, or you're going to walk away from it, or you could easily, and quite often happens, subtly sabotage it with little hidden messages. Oh, sorry, I poured you a drink. Oh, I forgot. Oh, sorry. Things, just stupid little things that are all part. Sometimes it's deliberate sabotage. That's the one that really upsets me. I mean, the kind of the mother who's losing her drinking companion, you can kind of understand that she didn't think it through and she wasn't thinking clearly, although I thought it was awful at the time. But it's when people go out of their way to sabotage, like I said, spiking drinks or
Oh God.
showing people up in public. Well, here's my partner. They're not drinking any longer. Sorry
Yeah.
everybody, but
Yeah.
they're not drinking. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
That's sort of public shaming, and it's
Ridiculing.
sabotage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hate that. It's really awful.
yeah.
And to deal with this, it's about having boundaries, which we talk about a
Mhm.
lot, and it's having a sober circle. I think
Having a
that's
sort of
really key, because when everyone around you's going, oh, you're not, but you could just have one. Like, it's
yeah,
been 3 months. Like, what's the big
yeah,
deal? The ridicule. It's very hard to withstand that on your own. It really is. And if you have a group of people that what made the difference for me is, like, I quite like these sober people. They're quite interesting,
hmm,
and we've done a few fun things together, and I feel really
hmm,
comfortable in their company. Like,
yeah,
when you've got that, you're like, I had that several times where I felt kind of, I was with my peer groups who drank, and I was ridiculed a little bit, and I never thought about drinking. I didn't like it.
hmm,
And then I'd go with my sober group and be like, oh, these are my people. I've
yeah,
got people who get me, who see, and what we're talking about here is a question of perspective.
mm,
It is, drinkers have a certain perspective, and non-drinkers, sober people, have a different perspective. And it's
mm,
really important to have people who have the same perspective about you. Now, nobody, I don't think, has the same perspective about everything. It's not universal. Like, I might, in that group, we may have different perspectives about, I don't know, politics or different things, but we have the exact same perspective about sobriety and all of that kind of stuff. And that will ensure you and protect you against the arrows of
mhm.
the other people who are trying to sabotage you. Now, eventually, I think, when you stay sober, eventually they get used to it, I think.
They do. I was just thinking as you were talking then, this happens in earlier sobriety. Uh,
Yes.
it happens when people aren't used to it or they're not comfortable with who you are. It happens, and that's the trouble, is that's when you're least well protected. Sabotage happens in early recovery, when we're at our weakest, when our resolve may be a little bit shaky, and because once you've been sober for a year or so, people give up on that sort of thing. They know that it's an established thing and it's going to be, but they catch you when you're at your weakest and you're most vulnerable in early stages. And that's when they'll try and rock you back to going back on in being a part of the drinking group again or whatever. And I think that's the problem, is it's very difficult to take a strong ownership of your decision in those early stages when you're vulnerable, because you've probably done it. You've probably said quite a few times before this point, I'm going to stop drinking. It's not the first, it won't be the first time you've said it. So you're not, you're saying it this time but you feel that there's more commitment and more meaning to it this time. And what you really want is for everybody to be super supportive and help you through that difficult period, because they know you've been through this before. But it only takes a couple of people, one person, particularly if it's your partner, to just be, oh, I suppose you're not drinking again tonight. I mean, sabotage can be such a subtle little thing. It doesn't have to be, as we said, oh God, you're so boring now. It's like, should I pour you a drink or not? Or
Yeah.
just,
That. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Are you having a drink, or are you not
yeah,
having? Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That little thing.
Yeah,
Like it's so hard for people to understand that it's a forever thing. And you're right. You're right for saying that this is a phenomenon. So one of the things I say all the time is early sobriety is not how it is long term.
exactly.
These are things. No, I can't remember the last time somebody did this to me. I mean, it's been decades, right?
Sure.
This is a phenomenon that is likely to occur in early sobriety about the first year or two.
Yeah.
And eventually people just move on and get used to the fact that you don't drink. And then what happens is people begin to see that you've changed and
Yes.
typically you're much more attractive as a person. You're just, your life actually looks, and then they start seeing that. And then
Yes.
sometimes people follow on the sober journey.
They do. But I think it's that initial stage, and some relationships don't survive it. Some relationships, I mean, you've got to really fight your corner. And, we are aware of people in Soberful who, at the early stages of their sobriety, had to
Yeah.
really fight their corner and say, no, you go off and do your thing. I'm doing this. I'm not, and they've had to. It's tough in a relationship where it's been almost like Pavlov's dog. Get home in the evening. This is what we do. It's just sort of to make it that change. You've got to really. That's, as you said. That's where you need connection. That's where you need people to say, "This is going on at home. I'm coming home. I'm finding a lot of pressure from my partner. They want me to drink. They want me to go back to how it was." To have people say, well, we think you're doing really well and we're doing great and you should keep it going. If you haven't got that, I think you're much more likely to be sabotaged. And, another one is projecting forward, which we do enough anyway of ourselves. But it's like, well, what are you going to do at Christmas? What are you going to do at the wedding? I mean, how many times have I had clients come to me and they really, really want to get sober and they do all right for a while. And then they think, yeah, Chip, but I've got a wedding in 2 months' time. What am I going to do? And, you might find I've had a little spate lately of clients going to stag do's. And there's been one example where everybody really, really respected the person and their sobriety. And it was tough for the person to get through it, but they were given a lot of respect by the other people on the stage. And one where there was no allowance made whatsoever for the fact that somebody was sober, and they just had to keep on taking themselves to bed early, avoiding all the kind of it was just there was an unwillingness on the other people's part to help, and in a way not helping somebody is sabotaging them. If you can see somebody struggling and somebody says, look, I'm going to really struggle on this stag do because I'm sober. If somebody doesn't say, well, okay, how can we help you get through this? They're sabotaging it. If they're not going to say, they're not going to put helpful things in your way, it's going to be making life very difficult for you. But I mean, I remember the trouble I had, and I have to take, my share of the responsibility as well, constantly trying to get clean. And my partner at the time would say, oh, this is good. This is really good. And then after 3 or 4 days, they go, oh, come on, let's do it again. And I would,
Yeah.
and I'd probably do the same to them as well. But I do think it's something that is, you have to be on the lookout for it, because I think, my advice would be, if you've got a partner or you're very close to your family or your friends, say beforehand, get a feel beforehand of how they're going to react. I'm going to be going sober tomorrow. What will that mean to you? How will that affect your life? How do you think about that? Now, unfortunately, I doubt that's a conversation that very often takes place. But I do think that if you're going to make that decision to be sober, seeing if you're going to get the support of your partner or family is an important thing to try and look out for, because you're going to be ambushed by it otherwise. And I think unfortunately, though, I can't think of many cases where I've heard of people sort of sounding out how it's going to go down with their partner or friends. It's usually quite a sudden decision. They might come and see somebody, they might read something, they might see something, and they go, no, I'm going to stop. It's usually quite a sudden decision. It's been building for many years, but when it happens, it's quite a sudden decision, and therefore catches everybody, partners, families, friends. It catches them unawares and they're not ready for it. And that's when they they feel, as I said, ambushed, and they feel that I don't like this. This change has happened too quickly. Suddenly happened too quickly, and I'm not ready for it. We didn't talk about this. We didn't agree this. You're going to be completely different. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I mean, that's another way of that's sabotage. What am I going to do when you're when you're not drinking? Well, what am I going to do? It's almost gaslighting. It's like, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah, like you're responsible for the experience
Yes.
I'm having. So
Yeah.
I had a client recently whose partner had been pretty supportive and had their own drinking had then sort of been moderated by the wife's sobriety. And then the conflict was coming, like it'd been a few months and she was really, she was sober. She wanted to be sober. And they were, I think they were on holiday or something, and the conflict was coming because she wanted to leave earlier. Like she was done at 11 and had a nice time, but he's been drinking and wanted to stay on like they used to do, which is just to stay up drinking to 2 or 3 a.m. and then feel like absolute crap for the next 2 days. And the conflict was coming up there that it was almost like he'd sort of repressed it for so long. He was really going for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say, when people are listening to this, because you hit the nail on the head again about it is fear. And it is, if we are in a partnership with someone, is the relationship going to survive?
Yep.
And it's quite a quandary because, there might be lots of good things about the relationship. You might have children and all the financial obligations. But if you continue drinking the way you're drinking, you're going to cause serious harm to yourself. And, by the time people get to this point, they've probably tried at least multiple years of trying to moderate.
Sure.
So there's no,
exactly.
You've done that. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I want to say I've seen everything. I've seen the partner then get sober down the road and the relationship flourish. Mm-hmm. I've seen the partner kind of just sort of moderate and it's been tolerated and it's sort of been fine and the relationship's been all right. I've seen people break up. One of the things I will say about being sober, and it's not just the not drinking bit. Down the road, what I think happens is when you become sober, you're able to grow much more than you could when you were drinking. And you're someone that's growing. And then you sort of begin to realize that some of the people that you drank with are just not growing emotionally, spiritually. Do you know what I mean? And it comes... that's what I've seen happen, is that it's just you grow past people. Mm-hmm. You just grow past people. And it's not the not drinking alcohol, it's that you're just growing in a different way because you get the bandwidth back because you're not drinking anymore.
Yes. You've made me realize then that also another thing that happens is, let's say somebody makes a decision to go to a lot of Soberful meetings or a lot of self-help meetings. The partner could be saying, oh, what, going off with your boring old mates now again, are you?
Yeah.
What, again?
It's really inconvenient. It's really inconvenient that you do that.
You went last week. What, is this going to happen happen every week? Oh, crikey, Well, I mean, I didn't realize you were going to go that often, just anything rather than kind of engage. To me, anything that rather than fully engaging with somebody's decision to be sober is, in my view, a subtle form of sabotage, because what you're basically saying is, I'm not going to really actively help you get sober. You can do it if you want to, but I'm not going to actively really help you. I'm going to carry on drinking in front of you. That's another one. That's another sabotaging thing to do. Drink of wine in front of you. Oh, you're not having this, are you? It's really nice. Oh, you would have loved that one.
Yeah, I had a client do this. They stopped drinking, and their thing was maybe a certain wine, like that was their thing. They could leave the spirits, leave the beer, but that wine was, and it's like, and then they brought that wine home. Like of all the wines, they know that's the one I love. They just brought that home and put it on the side. But the other thing that you said there is about it's also sabotaging the help. Like,
Yes.
oh, it's really inconvenient that you're going to all these meetings. It's like, oh, you're
Yep.
doing what? You're going away? Like sabotaging, trying to sabotage those connections that you're building
Yeah.
with sober people. And it's all driven by fear. It's
Yep.
driven by fear. The other person is frightened that this big change is happening. It's holding up a mirror to their drinking. They don't want to see that. It's too frightening. So it's all driven by fear. So there's a lot to navigate. There's a
There
lot
is
to
a lot
navigate with
because
this.
as you were saying that there, I thought, I mean, I agreed with it completely, but I've also seen it whereby I think it would be fair for me to say where the woman has disempowered herself and her decision making through her drinking, and the partner has taken advantage of that, certainly sexually. When she's drunk, she's much more sexually available. And I mean, I may be getting it too gender biased, but I don't think I am really. And, that kind of, well, we're never going to have sex again. Well, can't you? Aren't you enjoying this? And just sort of making, because sexual relationships in early recovery, again, without the use of alcohol, are usually quite difficult in early recovery. And the last thing you want is your partner kind of going, "Oh, come on, you used to do this all the time," and and it's just as we've said, probably repetitively, it's the other person's fear that's manifesting itself. And what is so difficult, as we've said, is trying to stand your ground, often with maybe people who've been quite powerful, and you're having to stand your ground and say, no, I don't want to drink any longer. I want to make this decision for myself. That kind of assertive, protective assertiveness doesn't come in the first 2 or 3 months of recovery. We're not usually able to be that strongly assertive and say, please stop doing that. That really undermines what I'm trying to do. That kind of assertiveness doesn't usually come till much later on. And I think it can often be taken advantage of. If somebody's kind of wavering, oh God, I'm really fancy, doing what we suggest they do is voicing it out loud and say, God, I really feel like drinking at the moment, which is actually a way I would suggest people do to kind of to get the power out of it. If the partner goes, well, come on then, let's have one. That's sabotage. That's unsupportive sabotage.
And I also think everybody who gets sober experiences them to some degree or another. Like my family are just like, they barely drink. Like they are the lightest drinkers you've ever met in your life. They barely drink. But my peer group, for sure. I don't recall. So getting sober is a really good way to find out who your friends are. So my good friends that I've had for decades, they were really supportive. I think the fair weather people dropped away pretty quickly, but they were the ones who were like, what? Like, oh my God, so boring. But I made the very wise decision of finding a sober community from day one. And that is what strengthened me against the peer group judgment.
Yeah.
So I don't think anyone doesn't experience this in some degree, whether it's friends, it could just be a work situation. I've been in a lot of work situations where like drinking after work and certainly on a Friday was a big part of the culture.
Yeah.
So, I think that most people, I've just recalled something. I got to tell you this. I remember when I was 18, 19, and I was working in the civil service in King's Lynn, and big drinking culture. Thursday, Friday after work, lunchtimes as well. There was a big crew of us. And there was a woman there who didn't drink, and she was really good fun. And there was always work dues, like we were a big thing. It was the 90s. And she didn't drink. And she would come occasionally if it was like, the Christmas party or something. And I was definitely one of them. There was 2 or 3 of us who went on and on and on at her for not drinking, on and on at her. And she was just like, no, I don't drink. I look back and I realized she was sober, because she did say, I remember a couple of times she said that I used to drink when I was younger. Like I was very cute, like it really piqued me. I got a little bee in, and there was 2 or 3 of us who had a bee in our bonnet, and she was really like very like good at like no. And I look back with shame now, because I realized I was doing that. I was 19, I didn't know what. But I look back, I realized she was sober, and we were doing that to her. So I know I've also done it to people back in my drinking days. I don't think, to be honest, I came across many people who didn't drink. She's probably the only one, but I didn't like people not drinking. I know that much.
No, exactly. No. I was probably the first person. No, there was one anyway. Yeah, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And I mean, I've got a client. He probably knows
Bullying in a way.
It is bullying. Yeah, I mean, I've got a client that drinking is very much part of the family get together. That's what they do. They meet in a restaurant, they drink, and then suddenly, well, I'm not drinking any longer, and not met with support. Oh God, you're going to be so boring. You're going to be one of those not drinking people again. Just it can be so subtle. But for somebody who's vulnerable in an early recovery, those remarks, they cut deep. And
they cut deep.
Somebody saying, "Oh, what? You're going to be one of those boring non-drinkers?" That's a devastating remark to hear, rather than being supported and, "Oh, thanks, really well done. How long? You got 2 weeks now. That's great. Well done." I can think of so many clients and people that I know who have not been met with support, who get met with, "Oh God, this is going to change so many things," And actually, it doesn't. When you actually break it down, doesn't have to change anybody's life at all. You carry on doing what you want to do if you want to.
Yeah, exactly.
You can do it. I'm saying I'm not drinking. I'm not saying we've got to stop drinking. I might be saying later on in a few weeks' time, you getting drunk every night is not improving our relationship. But it's just my decision. You can do what you like. And I think it's so, as I said, it's so difficult to be strong in early recovery. But I do think maybe if people are listening to this episode and they're thinking of getting sober, maybe just try and get a feel of what it would be like. I mean, it's something that isn't necessarily available to everybody, but if you've got the opportunity to say, "Look, I'm going to stop drinking next week," how do you think you're going to react to that? How do you think, can we get? Are you going to support that? Are you not going to support that?
What I always advise my clients is to absolutely not say anything about anyone else's drinking.
Well,
it is to say, like, you do you. Just this is what I'm going to be. Yep, you want to go out with the boy? You go and do that. That's fine. I'm going to be in the guest bedroom though because I don't, I just don't want to. I don't like it, But that's fine. I'm not. You just do whatever you want to do, and so it's about having boundaries. It's about you have to get sober for you. You are going to get these arrows thrown at you. You need community and you need mentorship. Like this is navigatable.
Yeah.
But it's a phenomenon that just happens in early sobriety, but it's really hard to do it on your own. So having a community, having a mentor, sponsor, guidance, counselor, all that kind of thing, it's going to make all of this much more. And all kinds of things can happen. The most important thing is you do this for your own health and well-being, because clearly if you've come to this point, clearly alcohol's no longer your friend. And it's quite a big decision that you're going to carry on as things are because you're scared of upsetting the apple cart and that you won't be included or liked or loved. And it's a whole other thing, sacrificing yourself in that way for all of those things.
Yeah.
And you know what? I want to end on this. In my experience, when you add even a moderate amount of alcohol, but certainly a significant amount of alcohol to any relationship, it's not good for the relationship. No. Whether it's friendships, whether adding alcohol to relationships, it long term, certainly in the beginning, it can be helpful maybe, but it just is poisonous over time for relationships.
But we delude ourselves that it absolutely strengthens the relationship. That it's something. Oh, we really, how many? Oh, you're my best buddy. And actually, you've probably spent the evening talking about nothing of any consequence at all. Actually, but I think it's something to be on the lookout for. I think if you think that you're going to make a decision to be sober and be met with total and utter support from everybody that you've ever had long relationships with, you're deluding yourself, because I think you can expect some kickback, because I think, as I said, people get frightened, they get scared, they don't know how it's going to change, they don't know how you're going to change, because you are going to change a lot. and people don't know how they're going to cope with that. They think they're going to be living with somebody completely different. And in some cases, they are going to be living with somebody completely different. They're getting to know somebody completely new.
Yeah. Well, let us know when this episode goes out on social media how people have tried to sabotage you, how you've navigated around it. It is definitely something that everybody's going to have to do to some degree or other when they first get sober. And I just want to say one more thing. The thing is about our relationships and sobriety. Once we navigate these early waters, everything's better. All your relationships are better. Everything, the fun is there's so much more fun to be had, and everything's better. But we've got to navigate choppy waters sometimes at the beginning to get there. So keep going no matter what. Let us know what your experiences are when you see this episode go out and how you've navigated it. And for anyone listening who relates to this, and if you're struggling with this on your own, reach out to sober communities, to our programs, to whatever, because there is a way that you can get through this.
And do you know, I just want to say also something. I've started listening to a lot of podcasts lately, and listening to sort of what other people are doing, sober podcasts and things. They've all got adverts. I've got to scroll through minutes and minutes of adverts before I get to the real stuff. And we don't have that here. And
we don't do advertising. We could, but we don't.
Yeah. And I think I get into something and then suddenly, sorry, we're going to have a break now. And they go off and they're talking about something else and they're promoting something. So I'm glad we don't do that.
Yeah. There's no advertising. This is our service. This is our service, which is why we'd really appreciate it if you could like and follow the podcast.
Yeah.
And we will be back next week. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.